Hi, Maya. Hi, Morag. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
That's a pleasure. I didn't realise I was. Am I ready to go now? Oh, it's a bit later, isn't it?
Oh, no, look, I think we're
right on time.
I think Maya was just doing all the introductions of what's been happening,
fantastic.
the updates, and so I reckon she's almost ready to go into the session with you.
Fantastic. All right, I'll get comfortable outside. I'll set up a little position out there, and I'll be ready to go. I've made myself a cup of tea, so all's well.
Fantastic. We're sitting here at Southwest Rocks. So if you hear lots of nature noises behind us, that's...
I love Southwest Rocks.
I know. We're on trying to get our way to Gippsland Lakes. But are you keeping safe with all the stuff that's going on in Sydney, Costa?
Well, I'm actually in Melbourne.
Oh, that's right. You are in Melbourne. All right. So you're all right then.
I came to Melbourne for to catch up with our production team for the first time since March, and have a final meeting and a final and a first meeting, and then a little bit of a gathering just to put a bow on the year, and that was it on Wednesday and Thursday, and then yesterday was our final show for the year. So I had a whole lot of publicity to do around that, and here we are, sort of in the first day of the break, and what a great thing to be able to be involved with. Thanks, Maya.
Well, thank you for joining us all. I know it's been a crazy time of year for you, so I'm glad you could be here with us. I'm just going to fiddle around with the technology to make you on a spotlight with Maya as well, just as we go into this next section.
Yeah, excellent. I might slightly more garden-esque background.
So I'm just going to begin by introducing Costa for those who might not have heard of him and his amazing feats that he's done. So most people know him as the one of the most popular TV celebrities. He's the host of ABC's Gardening Australia. He's also part of Dirt Go World, which is a kids show here in Australia, and
a permaculture kids show, nonetheless. Yeah. I mean, how amazing is that?
I remember watching it many times when I was a kid. But he's also a compost ambassador, a permaculture ambassador, and he's passionate in schools and community gardens, and coming and joining us. So thank you for joining us today, and welcome back. You've joined us once before, actually.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so we've got people from around the world today. We've got people from, we've got Tom joining from Uganda, and it's the middle of the night for him. And I think we've got some people joining from Asia, and a few people joining from Australia
and United
Americas
States
as well. Yeah. So, yeah. I'm going to start with the questions now. Also, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Costa, we've got heaps of time for questions afterwards. So if you'd like to put them in the chat or save them for afterwards, because I probably won't be able to see them until after.
I'll try and keep an eye on it too.
Yeah. So I'd like to start off by asking you, how do you describe permaculture, and why do you think young people should be getting involved with it?
Great opening question, Maya. That's a ripper. I suppose I'd describe permaculture as a way of looking at life as a whole. I'd contain that by saying, by direct definition of the words, maintaining a permanent culture involves so many layers. It's not just the actual physical activity of what is a culture, what is a human settlement, like why do people come together as a community? I mean, we come together as a community to look after ourselves, to look after who we have around us, but also to leave a place in a better way than it was, so that the benefits that we've had of enjoying the natural wonders of the world should not cease because we've been greedy and we've felt entitled and that this is all for us and and I'm not worried about anything else. And that takes you into the cultural side of perspective, and how you look at culture is how you look at your outlook on why you're here. So that becomes a little bit spiritual as well, in the sense that you need to think about not just privileges, the privilege of being alive, but also the obligations and duties. And I think permaculture encapsulates those obligations and duties of us as individuals, and what we must do to look after ourselves, but what we also must do to look after the world we need to survive, but then also the world as an entire operating system. And so then you start to look at design and say, well, what things am I doing that are having positive and negative impacts? And is that a result of design? Is that a result of my way of not just seeing the world, but acting in the world? So it's this wonderful lens that permaculture is, because it has this fantastic capacity to look at the big picture of us as a culture and as a worldwide community. But then it can zero right down and look and say to you, what is your footprint? What are your daily habits? How are they leaving a legacy? And what is that legacy? Is that legacy landfill? Is that legacy single-use plastic? Is that legacy clearing of forests and fracking of the land? Or is that a regenerative legacy? And is that a connection to the First Nations people and how they have survived for so long? Yet this industrial world that we're living in 200 years, we've done immeasurable damage. So this capacity to shift your lens, I think that to me is the most exciting thing about permaculture, because it stimulates the broad, but it also gives you those very tools, that solutions-based, action-focused approach, which I already know that, in your case, you're doing that. I mean, just permayouth itself encapsulates all of this, because it's bringing the big picture of all of the people that are here watching. I mean, I think it's incredible that we can use this technology to do the big picture, but then at the same time, you are sharing solutions for me to see, and for someone in the US to see, and someone in Africa to see, and someone in Europe to see. So that your permayouth captures everything about permaculture from that moving lens, and at any one point we can shift that lens and really share that ability of the lens to expand and contract.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of the lens. I think
zooming in and then zooming back out again. Yeah.
And I suppose, and when I'm in my get grubby mode, well, it's not a mode, and that's why, thinking about my role on Get Grubby TV and Dirt Girl World, when we set that up, and we said, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Costa, Costa the Garden Gnome, so that it's still me. I didn't want to be some character, because that was useless, because then when people see me, they know that I have the same goggles on. So as an adult, when I have my permaculture goggles on, when I have my nature goggles on, they're the same thing. So whether I've got my red garden gnome's hat on or not, children bump into me in the street and they go, Costa, lovely. They're not saying, oh, is that George the gnome? And then they're confused. So yeah, and the goggles are the biggest thing, and I use that analogy because for me, it's not an analogy. Those goggles are on all the time, and I'm constantly looking, and there is that adjustment there that blows it out to big picture, but then brings it into the joy of looking at an eggshell and understanding how valuable it is.
Yeah, that is, the first principle of permaculture, that observe and interact. And, unless we do that, we're kind of missing the most important part of everything, and we can't design healthy, sustainable human habitats if we don't have that lens on. And I think it's critical. It's one of the most important things.
And I feel like in all the things that I do, we can look. Everyone's looking. I mean, everyone's constantly looking around, but there's a big difference for me between looking and seeing. And
yep.
And when we actually look and see, when we actually listen but hear, many people can listen to a conversation, but they don't hear what that person's saying. They hear what they want to hear, and that I think, you know, particularly for you and everyone involved in permayouth, that's the key, because when you actually hear what someone's saying, then your capacity to communicate with them, it takes on a new level, because the understanding, you break through that wall of divide. And then if I hear what you're saying, by really listening and hearing the intent, and hearing exactly where it's coming from. Where's it coming from? The heart? Where's it coming from? The mind? You know, what's the science? What's the kind of social motivation? All these things are taking place, and the skills you're all developing by communicating together. You're building up this capacity to clearly hear what someone's saying, and then you'll get things done, because there won't be this kind of like, I said, you thought, I thought, we did this and it was all wrong. It's like, okay, what do you want? Not what do you need from my perspective. And then we start to break down that whole entitlement thing, that, you know, I'm telling you what to do because you know, I'm saving the world. You know, and when we can let go of that sort of, you know, don't you know that I'm doing this for good. Lots of good things fall into the trash because people aren't actually listening and finding the timing. Because for me, it's all about the timing. And sometimes you may have to go around the block on something, and rather than think, oh, we were stopped, no, just think you were detoured to come back and come in on a better runway and land at a time where then the lights will be green in front of you, and you'll move through to the next stages without constantly hitting all these walls and then feeling like you're a victim. You know, like, oh, they don't want it and they're not listening and they're this. What I look at it and I say, well, if it didn't work, what was wrong with my delivery? What was wrong with my timing? How can I assess it? And then we come into that whole space of success and failure, and not thinking that, oh, that failed. No, it didn't fail. It required a little bit of tuning. Its timing was a little bit out. So let's recalibrate and fly as we can. And if we're flying with timing, then it will really have that domino effect and clear the pathway for you.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, doesn't it? It's all about the patterns of connection and the richness of the relationships, and that even if you do make a mistake and something doesn't work, that it's a learning experience as well, and that's great.
And I think, you know, one thing that's happened, and you know, all of you in permayouth, you've got this incredible tool of togetherness, and when you can do things, and you're doing it here in New South Wales in Australia, and someone's doing it in Tanzania, and what are their challenges, and they, through their lens, suddenly see and have a challenge that you never saw because you were coming at it differently. And then you go, well, actually, I can improve my model now. And so it becomes this modular thing where you say, this isn't it. Like there's no destination of the holy grail. Like we have solved the problems, and excuse me, don't you know who you think we are? Look at us. No, it's like this is solving a solution in 2020 on the 19th of December or for this season or whatever. But then how are you going to take that to the next level? And how are the people in the US going to apply it in their context? And when you can bash it around, and you know, I think one of the biggest things, particularly in the space where you're working, all of you listening as youth and as humans and as adults, as young adults, you know, that capacity to be and feel strongly about something with the heart, but not hang yourself up. We have to be open to assessment, and particularly now more than ever with the way that conversations occur. People come out and want to attack. And I think the most important thing, particularly for you, and I see it in anyone working in environment and conservation and so on, you've got to be really careful not to put yourself up there, because it's not you that's due for criticism. It's the issue. And we can pull an issue apart. We can swing at it like a piñata and knock the stuffing out of it, right? But it's not you. And I think that's really important. And that does not mean that you can't have heart and mongrel and drive and passion and perseverance. But no one has a right to bash you up. And if you build that, if you maintain that separation, then it doesn't matter what anyone says about the issue. And they can it, they can attack it, but that's fine. And then you might say, all right, well, that one's not quite right for the picking. Let's take this and put this one up for action. And that way you're not feeling like there's a real start and finish use by date of this challenge. You go, no, in our environment, because it might be totally acceptable over in Austria at the moment because the climate is right and people are ready for it. But in central Queensland, they're not ready. Or in you know, central Midwest USA, they're not ready. So what that means is we have to take it away, think about it in a new light, shift it, put it up on the hoist, give it a kick, give it a little respray, and then away we go again, and we drive off in that vehicle and we see how it goes. So I think that, you know, probably one of the most important things that I've seen and learned in the journey is to protect your heart and your person, and not hang yourself on. Otherwise you end up with what I've seen a lot of is people burning out. And that's a real shame, because if they burn out, then we lose them forever. So we really, and I think that's the best element of permayouth, in the sense that as a gathered group, you can share those skills of understanding those lines of where is my connection to this, but where is the issues freestanding for me to be able to put the boot into it, or to promote it and celebrate it as much as the spectrum allows, you know, because
we were talking the other day, Costa, about in another group actually wearing a cloak of resilience, and I think that's kind of a nice thing that we go out there and having together that like you're saying, this group together having an amazing resilience together to be able to support one another and not feel like they're alone wherever they are in the world, that there is a sense of togetherness and mutual learning. But anyway, I know that Maya has more questions, so I'll stop speaking. Sorry. I just love catching up with you, Costa. It's just not enough.
Yeah, so the next question I wanted to ask you, like, with all these different aspects of permaculture, from like the social side to the environmental side, what future would you like to see in the future? Like, say 50 years of you walking down the street, what would you like to see happening?
Oh, wow. What a big, broad, open-ended, free-ranging question is that? Speaking of free-ranging, I'd love to see chickens free-ranging there, of course. I suppose I'd love to see, if I was walking down the street, I'd love to see a situation where, you know, the streets were just these green canopied.
Our street.
Yeah, literally our street. Exactly. That's a great reference for all of you listening to build on. But a wonderful situation where, you know, the streets were designed and retrofitted, let's say, in a way that canopy was incorporated, people were growing collectively, and local food systems were as local as the street, and people were exchanging. The houses captured water, captured sunlight, captured generational riches by having the elders at home, still living at home. On Gardening Australia last night, I had the absolute privilege, Maya, of meeting a lady, and I got a message from her carer saying, Costa, I know you're busy, but is there any chance you could send a message to one of your biggest fans for her 100th birthday? And I was like, what did you say? 100? And then I just said, forget a message. What's your phone number? I'll video call. And then I started video calling Phyllis, of course, you know, with 100 years ago, the name Phyllis. How good's that? You know, I don't know any Phyllis's more contemporarily, but there's Phyllis. Her name is 100 years old as well. And I then went and visited her. Then I spoke to the researchers for the show, and we said, we've got to do a story on her. And then I went and we did this story where I helped, you know, remove any hazards around her garden, trips and steps and all these things. But there she is at 100 years old. She moved into that house as a 30-year-old in 1950. Now, you're reading about history, 1950. She's living. She moved in 1950. So work out the maths. 70 years in that house. And she accredits the activity, the gardening. And I think what a joy to have. We need our elders to be around our youth so that all of that knowledge. I spoke to her on the phone last night after the show. I rang at about 9:30 and she was in sort of like the post show. She said, oh, we've received so many messages, some messages from people I don't even know. And she was so excited. But I just think, you know, we can't have our elders living at, you know, you don't want our elders separated and living alone. Like, you know, so I'd see houses that are retrofitted in a way that we can have multi-generations living in our neighbourhoods and sharing those skills and all of the technological aspects of capturing light, capturing water, capturing and using microclimates to harvest everything from sunlight and water and produce, but to flowers and food for pollinators, so that then we bring the birds back in, and then we bring the insects and we regenerate ecosystems in a way that we do it locally. And I think, as David has said in his book, you know, the place that I see that in 50 years, some of the richest landscapes can be our cities. They can become these ecological hubs. Because particularly, you know, when you think about after the bushfires that we've had, where is the wildlife coming to? Where are the insects and birds coming to? They're coming back to the city. And so when we can turn these into biodiversity corridors, but that biodiversity goes out to the human side, to the cultural side, so that we then build this permanent cultural settlements that are growing and regenerating, not depreciating and degenerating. I see really big hope. I am excited about this. I think, you know, the challenges you have. I just read an article where, you know, out of the blue, someone says, in Queensland, we need to irradiate. We need to irradiate all the food, because that way we will control fruit fly. And you say, that's just one person's decision. And if that's allowed to pass through the night, and this is appropriate to everyone listening, because these same decisions are made by individuals within an organization. And when they said that they were going to do that to seeds earlier this year, there was such a massive outrage that they said, no, we'll only do it to seeds coming from areas of the US and areas of the world where they have these particular diseases. Otherwise, that would have wiped out the whole organic industry. And then now they want to say, let's irradiate all food to get rid of the fruit fly. But I say, Maya, and all you young science geeks out there, fix the fruit fly, work it out. How can we deal with this? Because that's your next role as a generation. There's scientific minds out there that are like, okay, let's solve it, not just nuke it. Just nuke it, because that's the simplest way. So you know, I think that, you know, in 50 years' time, the capacity to have cities that are these biodiverse, cultural, scientific landscapes that are also human settlements and home and artistic, creative hubs where people are playing music and eating fresh local food and expressing that through art and culture. Oh, that makes me excited.
On the subject of fruit flies, we have someone who's in the call at the moment who did a YouTube video on making fruit fly traps. So, Damon.
Yeah.
So
Young Damon. Yeah, awesome, Damon. We'll have to share that one around again. Make sure everyone gets to see that. And I'm sorry we've got a bit of there's some beach equipment that's arrived doing some drilling over here, so I hope that's not affecting our sound too much.
No, that sounds right to me.
That's an amazing vision, Costa.
I have another question, and so Costa, you've got an amazing media presence, you know, with the TV shows, Gardening Australia, Dirt Go World, radio, magazines, and, you know, talking to young people around the country and showing everyone their gardens, which is fantastic. And you also share what we see as a permaculture kind of way of gardening and living, even though it's not directly labeled as permaculture. And so as permayouth, we'd love to amplify our voices and reach more people. And so what would you advise us to do to kind of increase our media presence? Because we'd really love to share kind of our vision to as many people as possible.
Yeah, great ask there, Maya. I sort of again go back into that lens mode where you can pull back to big picture options, but then you also zero in and be the amplifier by what you do. Because I think one of the most powerful things in terms of absorption of who you are and what your message is when people see you just doing. And when they see that, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to stand on a box and say, hey, this is important. It's like, no, have a tomato. Oh, here's some corn. And I spend a lot of time thinking, how can I reverse the narrative rather than me telling to people asking? Because when someone asks you a question, then the whole context shifts, because then you can be as crazy mongrel excited and not seem like a fruitcake who's just trying to sell this thing and coming down at me like you're walking through the street and someone's saying, oh, can you sign this? Can you do this? Can you do that? And everyone's got so much going on. There's all this squelch coming into their radio system and their Wi-Fi, and they're going, oh, there's another notification and there's another this, and they're like, oh, no, excuse me. As opposed to when you are just doing, and when someone comes to you and says, oh, what's this? What are you up to? Then the question changes and it becomes, well, since you asked, suddenly de-armed. You're no longer someone trying to encourage or change something. You're actually someone flourishing in your space. And so I suppose I'd answer that question by saying, think about ways that you can quietly shift opportunity for people to ask questions rather than you give directions. And that can even be said for when you're talking to people, because when you get them asking questions, they're kind of giving the answers to what you would have to tell. And so instead of it being, oh, well, if you understood permaculture and principle number 7, as opposed to someone saying, so what you're saying is small and simple solutions. And then you go, yeah, that's right, because small and simple solutions do this. And then and that, so what I'm getting at here is, whether that's a news reporter, whether that's a podcaster asking a question, but what we can all do every day is have the general public, the family, our family members, the neighbor over the street, when they're asking us questions, we are being the most powerful amplifiers, because they then take that message and do the work for you. So in a sense, it becomes what we all call viral. Think about it like this COVID tracing. One person goes into an area, gets the disease, and then they go out here and see 100 people, and then those 100 people take it out and find another 1,000 people, and then those 1,000 reach it to 10,000. So that's where when our take on promotion is rebadged, and so instead of about promoting and pushing and forcing, when it's actually, this is just me, and this is what I love, and then finding it appropriate to the context of, oh, this podcast is talking about this. And probably the most important thing when I talk about media and publicity is, you can't get everything across in one interview, and don't try to, because that's when you sound like the desperate salesman. Listen to the conversation, listen to the question, and give an answer, and then generate conversation. Because anyone, whether they're a podcast, whether they're the 7 o'clock news, whether they're a blog, whether they're an Instagram live or a Facebook live or a newspaper or whatever, you've got to remember that they're feeding an audience, and they want entertainment. Like, they don't want to be told. They don't want a desperate sort of person trying to tell them everything about permaculture in a 5-minute show. And what's better is when you just give morsels that are a bit like, we go and film a story with Gardening Australia sometimes for 2 days filming, and it gets crunched down to 6 minutes. And when I first started, I was like, oh, where's the bit where Myra and I were walking and we talked about, yeah, well, it was too long and it didn't fit. And what about when Morag swung on a high line and came flying through and went over the top of the trees and landed? Yeah, but the light was not right, and we couldn't fit it in. But what comes through in that 6 minutes is enough to make people hungry. So if you can make sure that when you are promoting, when you're telling a story, tell the story from here, and don't overfill your stories, and don't overload people, because like anyone else, you guys are bombarded with info. Everyone's bombarded with info. So you want to just give them I was watching a documentary, a David Attenborough documentary the other day, and the one thing that I got out of it, I could have stopped it and watched it later, was he was talking about snails, because this was all about the power of egg, right? So he's talking about the joys of just the egg. And he said, little birds, they eat snails' shells because that gives them the calcium to build their shells and lay eggs and make more birds. Yet people put pellets out to kill snails, and then they say, oh, there's no little birds around anymore. Well, the little birds don't have shell to lay an egg to propagate and multiply. So it's about, I think the most important thing about your approach to media is find the morsels, find interesting things, and dish them up as nice snacks. There's times where you do a longer piece. There's times, but think about your capacity, whether it's your social media and what you post. You don't have to tell a massive story. Just give people think, oh, gee, that's interesting. And then maybe one link, you know, or maybe, oh, I was reading this. And then let them come back at you and say, what was that book you said you were reading? You know, there's ways we can treat media different to someone standing on a megaphone driving through the suburbs saying, we have the solutions and we're doing it now. And then people just run up their driveway and just hide behind the curtains and say, this fruitcake's coming at us again, you know?
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. I can't remember how many times when I was a teenager and I was yelling about save the forest and stop nuclear power and this. And I remember like watching actually as some of the people I knew start to walk to the other side of the street when they saw me coming.
and it's interesting because it's not to say that there's not a place for that. And, you know, there is a valid place for protest and please don't compare those two things, because, you know, the protests, the school marches, I've been involved with the Tasmanian Youth Climate Leaders Summits and things like that. These are very, very important because we need that. And again, that's that lens, you know, at this level, but then at that level, we need that. So just always remember where you are on the lens spectrum to determine the style of message you push out at that time.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Thanks, Costa. There's so much. I think what we might do for the permayouth is actually take out that little section of advice and then unpack it a bit, because there's lots of different, like they have a YouTube, they're writing a book, they've got social media, they've got these events and face-to-face clubs. And actually one of the really interesting things that's happening in terms of amplifying this at the moment, there's a number of people on this call. There's a new group that's just started in the north of Uganda. There's a woman here who's starting groups in America, Annette from Texas. Hi, Annette, how are you?
Hello.
And then there's groups from Malaysia who we've been linking with, and there's hubs forming all over. So if anyone has even a small group of people, it's about localizing these ideas and then coming back and connecting. Weekly, we have these weekly global meetings, and then monthly where we have a chance to speak with people like yourself to really kind of, you know, have this intergenerational and cross-cultural conversations. And so there's layers. There's like from the local to this global event that we do monthly rather than having one big annual event. We've decided just to have, you know, regular monthly events so we can touch base regularly and talk to so many, you know, inspiring people. And so that's been how it's, and we didn't plan that either, did we, permayouth? You know, this is just what's emerged by listening and really hearing to what people are asking for. And it's been an exciting journey this last year, hasn't it? Yeah.
It's fantastic. And I mean, allowing it to be loose enough to say, okay, this is working for now. And this doesn't have to go on forever. You know, it can morph in from the chrysalis into the butterfly and start to fly in different ways. Yeah, and we don't need to be sort of straitjacketed, because what you're doing now is what's needed now. And it's been needed because of the circumstances of this year. But it's also been generated and given momentum by the fact that everyone has been online a lot. So what a chance to be able to break down those distances and do this. And I think that capacity not to get precious about what's appropriate for a given period of time, because things do grow up and they flower and then they form a space for the new insects to come in and hatch on the flower heads and then on the seed pods and then on the dead plant, and then it falls down and it feeds the soil, which has the seeds that were up there. So, and you know what comes up in 2 years' time or however long this goes. And that's where I say, you know, sometimes, you know, a garden or a project may get to a point where it ends. And I say, don't mourn that, celebrate it, and allow yourself the freedom to look to the next, because that's how life works. And, you know, I saw, we had a wonderful story on the show last night where a lady was looking out a window in COVID, and suddenly she saw her very neighbourhood differently, because she looked down at the road and said, "There's a traffic island, like a roundabout, sort of well, it wasn't quite a roundabout because it was actually an oblong about." was sort of a rhombus about, because it wasn't roundabout, but the cars come around it like that because it's the end of the street. And she thought, I'm going to start gardening on there. And she started gardening on there. And what did it do? Other people are looking out the window and they're going, what's she up to? And people walking past with their dog and going, hey, that's the first time they look past and they might go, oh, what's she up to? You know? And then the second time they walk past and go, oh, wow, are they sunflowers coming up? And then the third time they go, oh, it's looking fantastic. You know, can I help? And that's, whether it's a massive project like what Greta did and created the climate strikes, or whether it's, you know, like the Youth Climate Coalition, who are making the action space for people to do something. Don't underestimate those first steps by one individual, because that goggle time where you just go, oh, hang on, that's a space of land there that I've never seen before, but I only saw it because I stopped, and I stopped because we were kind of locked down, and I think we can lock down our thoughts quickly at any time just by stepping back and going for a walk and letting nature talk to us.
Yeah, Lisa wrote in the chat before that what's happening is it's like they're becoming ripple makers, and things like that are ripple makers, like creating ripples of positive change. I think that's a lovely term, ripple makers.
Mushrooms as well.
Oh, and the myceliating mushrooms. Yeah, I think that's like, there's all this underground stuff going on, and then these little mushrooms pop up, and, you know, they seem like they're disparate, but they're actually part of this beautiful web that's going on of life underneath. And that's, yeah.
And even though they will, like, kind of, they're ephemeral and stuff, and they'll fall over, they like release spores before they die, and then it creates heaps of mushrooms.
And you don't know where they're going to land. They'll land wherever they want to land. You can't plan it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, and this, I mean, I'll get a bit sort of out there now, but, you know, I always talk to people about the idea that composting, and whether that's nature composting a tree through mycelium and fungi, but it's the only activity that we can ever do where we turn death into life. And when you think like that and you say, well, that tree fell down and it cleared light to allow the seedlings, but when it squashed some of the seedlings, only a few trees will grow up, but they will draw off that trunk to grow from that passing. And when we can become, when we let go of that fear around death, and understand that we are agents of life during our life, and we can help nature do what it does, which is constantly turn death into life in this thin layer on this planet, this rock spinning in the middle of of a place that you know, I'm not even going to try and explain because I don't know. But anyway, we're spinning around very fast, but all the life. When I was in the Tarkine wilderness in Tasmania, and this massive tree had fallen, it was covered in fungi, and we were walking through this forest, and there was this, it was like you were in a gymnasium with a sprung floor, and it was like all of this life was almost breathing, exhaling. And as you walked, you could hear the air being pushed out, and then it would breathe, smell this earth. It was unbelievable. But this tree, when you stood on it and looked at it on its side where it had fallen down, the roots, this was a tree that was 90 metres tall or 70 metres tall that had fallen. Its root ball was only about 2.5 metres wide because it's living in this layer, you know, and when you think like that, you just say, yes, that is the layer of life, and how we walk on that layer, how we propagate that layer, how our actions support and grow that layer. that's really everything that you're doing through your actions. And if you trace the source, literally the upwaters of your creek as permayouth back to that life-giving status quo, then wow, everything you're doing is important. Every meeting, every monthly meeting, because you're sharing systems, ideas, and ways that one person or a collective can amplify way beyond one set of lungs.
We've probably got time for about 3 questions. So
Sure.
3 quick questions. So anyone got any questions to put in the chat?
Or to speak out?
Oh yeah, to speak. There was something from before, and it was Ramya
Shiv Kumar.
Yeah, and he asked, "What's your legacy?" When you were talking about legacy.
Oh no, I think he was saying, "What's your legacy?" That's powerful.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
So that was
okay.
more of a comment saying that's a
Right.
great question to ask. What is the legacy that you're leaving, and how you're going to act? Yeah.
Yeah. And Eden's
Yeah.
just. Oh, sorry, but yeah, you go.
Yeah, that is a really interesting thing, and I think as a generation coming into that phase of growth like a plant, each and every one of you have this chance to think about your legacy, but it's about legacy. It's about building, and legacy takes care of itself through your actions. Sometimes if you get too focused on an end, it reminds me of this wonderful quote: "It's better to travel well than to arrive." It is, for want of a better term, it is about your path, and it is about what you do along the way. And the legacy side of it, it comes because of what you do, not because you're focusing on a legacy. It's kind of like looking at it like you can set those things up and draw on other people's legacies. But I reckon the biggest opportunity for all of you is to get out there and do it.
Eden's asked, "What's your favorite plant and why?"
I'll pick my favorite child. Geez, Eden, you got me on the spot. I suppose I could break it down into categories, because I could talk about the wild side of things, and it takes me back actually to what you asked earlier, Maya, about just what that vision was, and I suppose the most powerful element of that vision that I'm just seeing and wanting to get more of, and I know I touched on a little bit, is that rewilding. Our capacity to rewild, to help nature re-establish its ways, not our manicured ways, but a rewilding where we understand and provide that opportunity. So, in wild places, it's almost a combination of plants that work together across a season, across the year. And so, to pick one specifically, well, look, I'm looking at a lemon tree at the moment. And, as a Greek Australian, lemons are a big part of our culture. So I like to think the more we can hang both sides of it, the culture of nature and the culture of humans, so we can grow stuff for habitat and rewilding, and then we can grow the cultural elements, that how lemons are used. Are they preserved and pickled for one style of Southeast Asian cuisine, or are they used on your salads or turned into juice, and that side of it. And then other people do stuff with the leaves, and so yeah, I'll say a lemon at the moment, although I'm eating a lot of mangoes and I love it.
I love that idea of the multiple descriptions of things. That's kind of very Nora Bates in here. I like this question, Maya. I think we should get to this one.
So Sebastian and Maggie asked, how to not get mentally heavy or sad when looking fully at the problems our Earth faces, or how to handle the pressure of the problems in progress.
Oh, geez. Maggie and Seb, you nailed it. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head in terms of, that is front and center, and it's a really big thing, and it goes back a little to what I was saying about the protection of heart, and when I say protection of heart, I'm not saying isolation and, oh, I can't see it, so it doesn't exist. No, what I'm saying is overwhelm is a tool that people use to knock people off the scent. That if we can overwhelm you, then as a generation, another generation can just take advantage and keep you subdued. So once you feel overwhelmed and out of the equation, then you've been sterilized effectively. You've been cornered. So yes, after the bushfires, was I overwhelmed? I was devastated to think about how many animals and how much habitat was lost. But I also look at the fact that nature has an inbuilt resilience. Yes, Costa, but those fires were so intense that, some things will never come back. That's correct. But I can't carry that baggage. The fires have happened. What I need to do is say, okay, I feel that, I respect that, I understand it, and we're going to move on and find solutions. So I think it's really important to remember that if you allow, so you have to build a little bit of a mental routine where take it on, acknowledge it, and then place it in a spot where you say, that's safe there. I can come in and out of it, but it's not sitting on my shoulders. Because if it sits on your shoulders, it will tire you. Whereas it's like taking it, don't leave it on your desktop open and draining battery. Don't leave that app on, because you'll look at your mobile phone and the battery will go, because you've got all these apps on and they're draining you. Know it, don't ignore it, take it in, feel it. It's good to feel it because that motivates your actions, but then close the app and put it in a folder, and you can go back in there and add solutions to it.
Costa, thank you so much for joining us this time. I'm saying this just in case we drop out. So that would be a terrible shame to have not said thank you so much before.
No worries.